Revelation 5, beginning in verse 9. And they sung a new song, saying, Thou art worthy to take the book and to open the seals thereof. For thou wast slain and hast redeemed us to God by thy blood out of every kindred and tongue and people and nation. St. Paul said to the people of Athens, I perceive that in all things you are too superstitious. I tend to think if he came to this country right now, to the United States, I'm saying this from America and North Carolina. If he was to come here, he'd say to the Americans, I perceive that in all things you're too political. You know, some things have nothing really to do with politics, or if they do, it's by accident. I mean, we in the pro-life cause have known this for years. That it's not our faults that this moral issue has been hijacked into the world of politics, where both parties want to make sure it never gets resolved, by the way. Another subject for another day. I'm going to tell you a true story. This happened to a young man in my congregation. He happens to be black, and he had a friend who was here who was born and raised in Vietnam. They went to what I would have considered to be a rather civilized town, I thought, Virginia Beach, only to be victims of a hate crime in Virginia Beach. Innocently, these two young men went into a bar, only to be beaten almost to death. The method was to be trampled. And I know that when the skinheads and the neo-Nazis want to murder people, they do indeed try to trample them with their feet. And when they have murdered people, it has usually been by trampling or kicking the people to death. And this has gone on many times in this country. And you know who those lunatics are. Well, I think these people were doing the same thing. Well, eventually the sheriff's office, officers from it, deputies, showed up and proceeded to arrest one of the victims. You see, he had stood his ground, and as best he could, he had managed to get back up and then try to defend not only himself but his friend from Vietnam. He was the victim of the crime. I know this family. I know the mother very well. She's been in our church longer than I've been here, and I've been here 11 years plus, a bit over 11 years. I'm the rector of St. Benedict's in Chapel Hill. The victim was arrested. The victim needed medical treatment. You see, I know from the friends I have that minority families, especially those whose ancestors were slaves down here in the South in the United States, give their children, and I think especially their sons, the talk. The talk is very important. And I think a lot of you have never heard of it, and why should you? You were raised in white, middle-class America, and you didn't need to have the talk, and so maybe you're not aware of it. But most of these families have known that it's necessary to give their children, and I think especially their sons, the talk. Part of the talk is always be respectful and totally cooperative when you're pulled over by the police. Because not to do so is very dangerous. I personally know some very sad stories where that's concerned. The talk includes telling them the truth, and this is the truth, that there are certain places you don't go and certain kind of white people you'd better avoid. Now, I'm going to say something that I want my colleagues here in the South, the clergy especially, to listen to what I'm about to say. One of the things that most of these people are taught in their youth is stay away from white people who sport the Confederate flag. I don't care if you approve or not. I don't care if you think they're right or wrong. Actually, they're right. I mean, there's a reason why even way up north in Indiana, members of the Ku Klux Klan carry the Confederate, actually the battle flag, because that was never the flag of the Confederacy. But it was never the flag of anybody's country, and it was never the symbol of anybody's heritage. I mean, I have a degree in history. I know these things. It was simply a battle flag carried by some units into the field. But that aside, you know, Humpty Dumpty was talking to Alice. You may remember this book from your childhood. And Humpty Dumpty insisted that the words he used only meant what he intended the words to mean. And no matter what the words mean to everybody else. You know, words, of course, that falls apart. I mean, language would die if everybody thought they could be so subjective about words. The same thing, though, that applies to words, that they communicate not necessarily something you intend. They communicate what they mean to the vast majority of people who hear them. That fact about words extends to symbols. Whatever you mean is irrelevant. Now, I've called this church growth and racial sensitivity. And I know people object to even the word sensitivity because it's been thrown in their faces ever since the 1980s and blah, 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 blah. Although I'll be quite frank with you, the problem is the same people who react to that are usually very insensitive, but they don't know it. It's like people who are prejudiced, but they don't know they're prejudiced. They don't know that they actually house very serious bigoted ideas because they don't hate anybody, and they would never lynch anybody, and it would never occur to them to even be mean to anybody. Problem is, it also doesn't occur to them to treat everyone with respect and to listen to other people's perspectives and to learn from their perspectives and to realize that other perspective that you've never even considered before and that you find for some reason maybe even to be wrong or something you'd want to argue with, whether or not, the fact is you must realize what their perspective is and respect that fact if you want the doors of your church open to whoever might come in and join. We're Anglicans. We don't target specific groups of people as the ones to whom we preach the gospel. Leave that to the evangelical Protestants. That's their shtick. That's not our shtick. We know that we are to preach the gospel and extend the invitation to come into God's church to each and every person, and to treat everyone, once they're in the church, as full members of the body of Christ. We are not called to target, well, we're just targeting the middle-class white people over here, and they're targeting the poor black people over there, and we don't do that. Our churches are for everybody who wants to come and follow Christ. I had some people get mad with me a few months ago because they were talking about wearing Confederate battle flag pins, and I said, I am urging you, please don't do it. It might to you mean something that, based on your understanding, is completely innocent. You may even think you're fighting for history and heritage, though as a man with a degree in history, I know that, no, you're not. You don't know what that history is, or you wouldn't confuse these things with the battle for history and heritage, because they're really not. But I mean, the history was a lot more complicated than that. But the fact of the matter is that may be your innocent intention. But the symbol means what it means. What does it mean to black people? Most of them. There's always the tokens or exceptions, but I mean the majority of people whose ancestors were slaves down here. What does it mean to them if you're going to wear the Confederate battle flag and start talking about Southern heritage and making that an issue? To them it means you're dangerous, possibly, but at the very least, you're telling them, whether you mean to or not, you're telling them they're not welcome in your church. And you know what? Your mission is to grow the church. And if something is so important to you that you allow that to hinder your mission, it's God's call on you, it's your vocation that you're failing at. I would want someone to bring that to my attention if I was doing it, and I want to bring it to your attention if you're doing it. Don't send out signals by the use of symbols. It might mean one thing to you, but to the majority of all these other people, it means something else. Don't let anything interfere with the growth of the church. Don't let anything interfere with evangelism. Because nothing else is our calling.